Many people fear that if they don't put such high perfectionistic expectations on themselves, then their work will suffer and it will affect how others view them. And while perfectionism definitely propels you forward into doing things well, it also holds you back through overthinking and putting way too much pressure on yourself. In this episode, I'm going to help you understand the root causes of perfectionism so you can take some pressure off yourself without sacrificing the big goals that you have. Hey, I'm Tati. Welcome to Calmly Coping. Each episode, I talk about how to cope with anxiety as an overthinker so you can live a calmer, more fulfilling life. This is episode number 11, Getting to the Root of Your Perfectionism. Perfectionism is when you strive for perfection and high performance. This is often accompanied by strong self-criticism and concern regarding how others will evaluate your performance. If you've ever gone on a job interview and been asked what your weaknesses are, a common answer to this question is, I tend to be a perfectionist. This is one of those answers that isn't necessarily viewed as a weakness, so the person doesn't really have to identify where their weaknesses are. On the outside, perfectionism is viewed as a good trait. When you're a student, an employee, a manager, or self-employed, it means you value your work and have high standards. Who doesn't like that? But on the inside, you are constantly critical of yourself and you're concerned that your work won't be good enough and that others will know it. You overthink things, procrastinate because it's hard to get started on perfection, and you never feel like you're good enough. So let's dive deeper into the root causes of perfectionism in this episode and what you can do about it. Thank you so much for tuning in. In today's episode, you're going to learn the 3 root causes of your perfectionism, if your parents are to blame for your perfectionism, and 2 tips to maintain your drive without the constant pressure that perfectionism puts on you, along with an action plan to help you crush your perfectionistic tendencies. To be honest, I was actually struggling with some of my perfectionistic tendencies as I was outlining this episode. I felt like I needed to encompass every single aspect of what perfectionism is, do my research, and, I forgot that this isn't a scientific research paper that I'm being graded on. And it's a podcast that's for a specific audience of people and a specific purpose. Of course, I value conveying accurate information, but I must ultimately accept that it's impossible for me to include every single piece of information regarding perfectionism. The way that I cope with this pressure that I put on myself is by understanding that my goal is to convey the most effective and accurate information in an easy to understand format so that you can learn and grow from it. This is one way of coping with unrealistic expectations that I'm going to discuss further on in this episode. But first, let's get to the root causes of your perfectionism. So I'm going to discuss 3 possible root causes of your perfectionism. You will most likely be able to relate to more than one, and understanding the causes and the why can help you pump the brakes when you feel the cycle of perfectionism starting up again. Root cause number 1 is the fear of failure. This includes a fear of making mistakes and the negative consequences that might occur if you don't perform up to your incredibly high standards. You probably overestimate what will happen if you fail. You are critical towards yourself and you fear what others will think of you if you don't perform well. Maybe you think that other people will see you as stupid, incompetent, or a failure. The criticisms you fear that other people will have about you are often just a reflection of how you speak to yourself. So for example, let's say you have a presentation tomorrow and you're up all night perfecting the slides and ensuring that the information is 100% accurate and you haven't missed a beat. You might fear that people will see you as being incompetent when really this is just a fear that you have about yourself and a way that you judge yourself because internally you lack a confidence in your abilities. This concept is referred to as imposter syndrome, which is a feeling of being a fraud or doubting your abilities, despite what you've achieved or any evidence of your success. Imposter syndrome can drive perfectionism because you are constantly questioning your competence and your abilities. So you overthink and you want things to appear perfect as a result in order to overcompensate for your fear of being a fraud. The fear of failure can be derived from internalized expectations that often begin in school with the pass-fail mentality. I honestly hate this concept because it's really not reflective of reality. The process of memorizing information, regurgitating it, and then being graded on it It creates a dangerous environment for perfectionists and high achievers because you tend to set the bar way too high and you feel discouraged anytime you don't get 100%. In school, failing is bad and passing is good. But what does it actually mean to pass in life as an adult? Does it mean success, happiness, having a good job? Do you even know what you're measuring yourself against and when you will finally feel happy? The problem of being a perfectionist is that it's like having the goal of wanting to make more money or having a lot of money. You will never be happy with this goal. When you have a non-specific goal of always wanting more or to be better, it never feels like it's enough. Another problem with the fear of failure is that failure is necessary for progress and growth. And this fear of failure keeps you stuck and can prevent you from trying something that seems too difficult or keep you stuck in that state of paralysis by analysis that happens when you overthink things. When you're used to doing well in school and getting the highest grades, it can be difficult to stomach the failure that comes in a career or as an entrepreneur. The second root cause of perfectionism is the fear of not being good enough and fearing that you will only be loved or appreciated for your work and how much you accomplish. This can be a consequence of parenting or any important adults that were in your life growing up. Did your parents have high expectations for you? Perfectionism can happen when you are constantly trying to live up to the high expectations that your parents had for you. And even as an adult, it can feel like it's never good enough. It also occurs as a result of being praised primarily for your work and your performance. This includes being praised for how well you do, what achievements you've accomplished, and not necessarily being praised for who you are as a person or being asked whether or not you're happy as a result of the accomplishments that you've achieved. Lastly, maybe you were parented with a combination of not receiving enough praise and acknowledgement, along with being criticized, punished, or blamed. If you were punished for doing poorly in school, this can create a drive to do well in order to avoid negative consequences. And this can persist into adulthood. Now keep in mind, this isn't to blame your parents or caregivers for your current problems, unless of course it falls into the category of abuse. This is just to help you have an explanation and understanding of why you may have learned certain behaviors growing up. Parents are only human, and the vast majority of the time, they're repeating the way that they've been raised and also doing things with the intention of supporting you. The reality is they may not have always been in the way that you needed it. So the third root cause of perfectionism comes as a result of anxiety and control. You may put your focus on everything you can control in order to cope with the fear of uncertainty that comes along with anxiety. So this is putting your focus on how much can I perfect this project or this email before I send it, because this is something you have control over and you don't necessarily have control over how the person responds to it or over how the presentation is received. So you put a lot of your focus into the work and the effort behind the actual task and the actual thing that you're trying to do. It comes as a result of uncertainty. So the feeling of uncertainty is really closely tied to anxiety. And uncertainty creates anxiety because there's so much room to think about the possible what ifs or what could be. And this leaves you feeling stuck and with a lack of direction. This can result in making you feel like you want to make the right choice of what to do next in order to try and get the outcome that you want. So you overthink and want to make the perfect choice and again get stuck in that cycle of paralysis by analysis of researching, Googling, seeking reassurance from others, and doubting yourself. So now that we've talked about the root causes of perfectionism, let's talk about whether or not it's possible to maintain your drive and your desire to perform well without the constant pressure and criticism that perfectionism creates. So it's totally possible. In the same way that you learn the behaviors and ways of thinking that led to perfectionism, you can unlearn those behaviors and replace them with new, healthier ways of thinking and performing. So you can focus on still performing well, but not getting stuck, doubting yourself, and constantly criticizing yourself. Unlearning perfectionism while maintaining your quality of work and high drive is a big component of my signature coaching program, where I help high-achieving women find clarity and focus by saying goodbye to overwhelm and pressure. DM me on Instagram at TatianaGLPC if you're interested in learning more. My number one tip to cope with perfectionism right now is by setting specific, realistic expectations depending on the situation. The way I coped with my automatic perfectionistic thoughts that I mentioned earlier in this episode was this. My initial unconscious expectation was to have this be a comprehensive episode on perfectionism and include every single piece of research and information regarding perfectionism, which is not possible. So I quickly noticed this unrealistic expectation and adjusted it to something specific and realistic, creating an episode on perfectionism conveying the most effective and accurate information that's targeted specifically towards my audience of listeners in an easy-to-understand format so that you can learn and grow from it. This specificity immediately gave me clarity and got me started. Tip number 2 is to show yourself compassion and be kind to yourself. You are doing much better than you think you are. I want to repeat that. You are doing much better than you think you are. Speak to yourself as you would a friend. Recognize your strengths and have pride for each and every one of your accomplishments, no matter how small. You deserve it. Perfectionism can be a trait that is highly valued externally, but that results in a lot of internal struggling and excessive time spent on tasks and projects. The same way you learn perfectionistic tendencies and behaviors and beliefs, you can also unlearn them and replace them with more positive behaviors and beliefs. To wrap up, today I talked about the 3 root causes of your perfectionism: fear of failure, fear of not being good enough, anxiety, and control. And I also talked about if your parents are to blame for your perfectionism. So the answer is no, they're not to blame unless you experienced abuse. But how you were raised can provide an explanation for these behaviors so you can better understand where they might have come from. And I also talked about 2 tips to maintain your drive without the constant pressure and criticism that you put on yourself. Tip number 1 is to set specific and realistic expectations. And tip number 2 is to be compassionate and kind with yourself. Your action tip is to download my free guide, Goodbye Overwhelm, your guide to accomplish more by doing less. This guide will take you step by step through the process of getting all those thoughts and overwhelming what ifs out of your head and taking intentional, focused action towards getting more accomplished by not trying to do all the things perfectly. You can download this guide at calmlycoping.com/overwhelm or click on the link in the description below if you're watching this video on YouTube. And if you're watching this on YouTube, please leave me a comment and let me know what helps you cope with perfectionism. And please subscribe and click on the notification bell so you get notified every time I have a new episode. If you found this podcast episode informative, please screenshot yourself listening to it and share it to your IG stories, tagging me at TatianaGLPC. Until next time, be calm.